Hi, I'm Robert Novak. This video is about what has been going on for thousands of years, and you'll start hearing more and more of this about some of the things I'm going to be sharing over the next few months and years. In this video, I have compiled the key wisdoms that you need to know to increase your awareness and to free your consciousness and your abilities. And even though this video is a little longer than I originally intended, I had to address all the things that you need to realize to be able to awaken even more. And much of what I will be sharing will be ahead of its time in the disclosure networks and in ways that the others aren't disclosing. My material will be truly eye-opening and beneficial as I disclose day-to-day things you just take for granted as normal, as just reality. But is the reality we are experiencing, is it engineered? And if it is, how much? Some of the information is going to be shocking, and that would be a normal reaction. And yet everything is going to be okay. As things are changing, and I want you to be free and empowered as quick as possible. In the end of the video, I will share with you the two most important things for you to do right now. And they are easy and fun, and yet they may be challenging because you probably haven't been doing them, but they will return you to your true abundance. I have broken down this video into 7 parts. The first is, what is the engineered reality? The second part is about frequency, and is one of the most important parts because there are a few very low frequency levels that humanity keeps looping in that keeps us entrapped, and you need to know what those are. The third part, we discuss the technology and narratives that use the mind and your emotions to direct your attention to manufacture a reality that the engineers are manufacturing with your creative consciousness energetics. In the fourth section, I will reveal possibly the most shocking part of our existence that keeps us limited and less than we truly are. In the fifth section, it's all about DNA. Why the hype now, and what's the real enlightening information you need to know? In the sixth section, I discuss time and astrology and how it is used in the engineered reality. And in the last section, I highlight 2 of the most important things you can do now. I'm really glad this video has crossed your path, as it is time for you and for all of us to go to greater heights. Let's talk about the engineered reality. Now, some of it may sound very grave and daunting, and yet it's something that we've still been living with for thousands of years. And you may think it's negative, and it is. And if that bothers you, it's understandable. And just realize that there's things then that are unconsciously reacted in you that want to come up and be exposed and freed, because, you know, what I'm saying or gonna share with you has been happening, and on an unconscious level, you know it, okay? I'm not gonna share a lot of the gruesome details, but I do need to go over some of the key components so you know, because there is right now, I'm sure, some intense feelings coming up in you that want to be exposed. Whether the details are there or not, at least the feelings are coming up, right? So it's really a good time to hear a lot of the different highlights and key wisdoms that I want, to assist you with to get through all of this. And it's coming up anyways, whether you like it or not, right? So no matter what, we have this, you got this, we can make this happen. And just realize that the world is changing, right? And all for the good. But in that change, there are things that are going to be dismantled and coming down. And we're going to sense and feel all that as then things get exposed, and even, the grave details about it. But don't worry, there's great inspiration there too. And, there's great freedom. Okay. Now, you may have heard the engineered reality be described as the matrix, and which is, key. But again, I don't want you to think of the movie as much, even though there's a lot of truths in there, right? I'm going to broaden it a little bit more and give you some other great details that you will need to know in order to maneuver through this with your awareness and consciousness, right? And also your creative essence. So it's really good to understand it. So one of the things that, when we look at the engineered reality, it definitely has its own space and time settings within this third, fourth dimension. And I know some people have referenced this as, being its own parallel universe from our original settings. And you may think, well, how is that even possible? And I know, because we're not used to hearing these type of things, right? We're not trained in them. These things aren't disclosed to us in our science and our education, freely to understand these type of things, and for a purpose, of course. Now, you might have also heard in your spiritual, circles, the term called the veil, right? And this is like this overall frequency fence of engineered reality. It's a netting, a technology. Okay, that's really important. It's a technology. And there's numerous frequency fences within the veil that totally suppress us. And this is why we need to know this. Now, the engineered reality is perpetuated by our creative essence, our creative conscious energy. It is controlled by an other source, a source that is different than the source you are a spark of, that which your true essence is a part of. And that's really important to know. It began thousands of years ago, and it is consistently engineered and upgraded, as is our physical bodies and our psyche, to perpetuate its existence. The engineered reality is mainly technology driven, engineered, controlled, and directed by an other source that is using a portion of your consciousness and a different space-time element within the Earth's lower dimensional dynamics to keep you locked into sustaining its or their lives, and therefore limiting your consciousness and capturing your essence and chaotic energy to live off of, while you live believing you are free. Our life force, our divine energy, and the energy given off from our chaotic living, or the activity of our consciousness in conflict, is a resource that powers the lives of other beings and the other source, believe it or not. Now, this includes the energy generated by constant contrasting behaviors, such as excessive mental thinking, emotional dramatizations, and physical conflicts. And evidence of our past, our real history, has been destroyed, buried, and not allowed access to. And it has been rewritten. There's no question about that. So we, don't realize who we truly are and our capabilities. And that's what's been happening. So historical history that you can get your hands on has been rewritten, and you cannot rely on it. And you cannot rely on what the experts tell you either, because they've been indoctrinated with history that may not be fully accurate, right? There could be some accuracy in it, but many other infiltrated, misinformation that gears you to another perspective, right? Which is off the true history. Now, also realize that many narratives, stories, and belief systems have been created for you to attach to and keep you entranced and entrenched into the engineered reality that is quite limiting. And when we discover all this, or when it's all lifted, you're going to be amazed at what is really our true potential and how free it is. Realize this: where our attention is where the energy of our creative consciousness goes, and therefore why narratives are manufactured. Yes, manufactured to direct your attention to what the controllers want manifested in the reality they are engineering. As creator beings, we manifest the reality they want to manufacture because our attention and creative energy flows in the direction they direct it to. And also, images and holographic technology has been inserted on our individual and collective timelines. Yeah, holographic technology. It's been used against us for thousands of years. This is not new technology, okay? We're just realizing it's a technology being used out there now, but it's been used against us for thousands of years. And these holographic inserts are like software programs that modify our behaviors and solidify repetitive patterns. Indoctrination is one of the key methods of programming us individually and socially, and condition someone and the masses to think and behave in the way the engineers want us to. They want you to fit in and stay focused in the space-time reality they have created to dominate you and their agendas for living. The objective of the engineered reality is for you not to know your greatness. So then you can be subject to suggestions and impressions upon your mind and energy field. You have to understand you've been living inside a box, which has been constructed for you so that you experience, is yourself just in, if you want to say, grave limitation, right? So that's all you experience is a finite nature of yourself, always with something left out, never really feeling totally complete. The good thing is that's ending. The finishing of the negative control of the mind and the invasion through the mind doorway of being by other forces. That's finishing. The Earth, our planet, was also hijacked, infiltrated, and its technology energetics that we were originally plugged into were dismantled and re-engineered to support the other source technologies that made us enslaved. And it even gave the Earth the identity of being a prison planet. Now, you're going to be glad to hear that the Earth grid lines and magnetics, its technologies, have been being restored. And the Mother Earth consciousness is at a level of enlightenment. And we're going to be returning, being plugged into the original Earth technologies that we were created to be an integral part of. This is really good, right? But you need to understand how we've been living for thousands of years and know that this is changing and why I want you to be ready for it and connect in with it, right? But later I'm going to be sharing many other different wisdoms related to frequency, consciousness, the different narratives, our DNA, how our mind and our emotions have been affected. And I'm sharing all those things so you have an idea of what's been happening, so then you can consciously stop those and unravel yourself from what has been, okay? Because it's still lingering around, especially in your consciousness. So we need to have some, information to be able to handle. And now for the daunting details that may seem unreal, and there's reasons for that, but let's go ahead and get into, some of the details that, again, may not be so pleasant to hear. We have been hybridized. There are many different species of us human beings. The planet has been visited so many times that the human race is one huge genetic experiment, mixing of genes from all sorts of beings from other places. And most of what gets called aliens are actually hybrid genetic experience, splices of humans with other beings already here on this earth. Human beings have always been a part of a series of experiments where routinely systems and programs were not only inserted into the body, but also into the mind and the emotional body, like the holographic inserts I mentioned before. Slowly, humanity has been mutated so that a more efficient, more docile, and less aging and repairable version of the human species now exists. That's us right now. And populations have been fed false images, distorted and rewritten history to make us believe we live in an advanced world, when in fact, the advanced world has been destroyed. And then the populations of us were largely replaced by a new type of human, which was genetically engineered, bred, and prepared underground. Yes, underground. Our memories have been wiped by the technologies of the other source beings, and the beings are of an other source. We are not one with them. We have our own source, they have theirs, and the two cannot mix. Now, what we call the ruling class or the elite of our current Earth have been genetically engineered and their mental capabilities enhanced to rule for the other beings and the technology of the other source, to perpetuate the continuance of the dominance and survivability of them. And the ruling class have been genetically engineered to have little or no empathy. They wish to perpetuate their own selves, seeing themselves as pure and better race. And you may have heard them being referred to as certain bloodline families. And this is all true. There does also exist interdimensional beings. They are beings that exist in other dimensions within our dimensions of physical existence. You do not see them with your naked eye. They can influence your mind and thoughts, and therefore our emotions and actions. They thrive on power and control. They enter your beingness, your consciousness, and affect your emotions when you open yourself to other sources of power and control, which are negative rather than positive. They weren't supposed to be here, but they were sucked into this existence after the Earth's grid work was being hijacked and dismantled. These interdimensional beings found themselves here. Interdimensional beings encourage fighting, sacrifice, and the betrayal of loved ones and land. And once a human being has been hijacked, they fight for power and control in every circumstance. They will usurp boundaries, they will commandeer sexuality for their own needs, and they'll become a servant of money over the connection with land and people's feelings. Because in all these cases, the connection with Mother Earth and the heart apparatus is broken. Sounds much like our ruling class and elite, right? Anyways, these interdimensional beings have an energetic weakening effect on us. And they can and do become the voices you hear in your head at times. You're not mad, you're not going crazy, right? But they do exist. I have plenty of examples of that in the sessions that I do with people. It's just too bad that, you know, the experts out there, if you want to say, in our mental health, doesn't always share about this. And of course, it's nothing you can see with your eyes, but it'd be nice that if there would be some wisdom shared in those capacities, so then you can actually, you know, resolve it, because you can, all right? And that's what would be great if that was out there. Now, there are some interdimensional beings who, through the same history of experimentation with humans, are able to take form here, and they mingle within the population. Don't be concerned. They'll be leaving. I have seen, when working with people, something what I call streams of consciousness traveling into someone's mind that, immediately the person reacting as if this stream of energy, as soon as it hit into them, like this frequency messaging, which was coming out of nowhere, it seemed like they immediately changed. And as I glanced at it, I mean, there's no question, it was like streaming through nothingness, so there had to be a veil, if you want to say, of a screen of another dimension where my consciousness could see the frequency coming through and hitting someone, but I couldn't see who was actually sending it, right? Well, I've come to realize certain things, and especially like in a session or glancing at someone's beingness, I can see different influences upon their consciousness. And to me, I read it as what I call dark consciousness. And therefore, I know that it's interdimensional beings that are part of it. Now, this is different than a demonic being, because this, that's a whole nother category. And it's also different than a spirit of a human being that has passed. Okay, so there is distinguishing differences here that you just need to recognize. Now, you'll be glad to hear, as I mentioned before, that they are leaving the Earth and they're going to get realigned in another time-space dimension. And this is because the Earth grid lines and the settings of the engineered reality is being lifted off, right? And they'll be going and getting realigned and going back to where they belong, which is wonderful, right? Now, even though they're leaving, we still need to unravel our consciousness from the recordings of the time influenced by them, right? Because our consciousness still exists, and especially if we're still holding on and attaching in consciousness to different, memories and experiences, that recordings, if you want to say, right? So we still need to unravel from this. And, one of the other, I think, one of the most inspiring and most important things to say about interdimensional beings is that they're easily dealt with using pure love, right? And the frequency of pure love has been locked out of the engineered dimensional reality of Earth, right? And we as humans have not known or have forgotten that we are beings of love. So we do not know how to use this universal current, this core identity of ourselves and the planet itself. But now love, the core identity of ourselves and the planet, is entering again, right? This is really very special. And we're considered the crown jewel of embodiment in the galaxy, and why beings of another source is intrigued by us and want to contain us. But they cannot contain us forever, because you cannot contain the power of pure love forever. Science knows we have multidimensional DNA, and they know the potentiality of it would greatly enhance our lives. And that's why the controllers of science call it junk DNA. We have multidimensional DNA in our cells. It's there, it's active, but not very much. And there's something we can do about it. We'll talk about that later, but it's there. I saw about 5 years ago in working with people, something like this energetic hold, if you want to say, on the two strands of DNA that science only recognizes, and that is considered our physical or chemical DNA. These two strands of DNA perpetuate the loop of living in our culture's history and our ancestors' traits, their characteristics and karma of ourselves and them. Now, there's no doubt that there is a karma loop in this engineered reality to perpetuate our enslavement in this limited reality we call life. This energetic hold I saw was no doubt technology of the other source, which was like it was spliced in and limited our access to multi-dimensions. Now, our constant intention of our creative conscious energy focused in the limited engineered reality of our physical senses has contributed to our multidimensional DNA becoming less active, and has also limited our experiences of physical reality to being restricted to just the two DNA potentials. And because our DNA has been limited to the focus of just two strands, our reality has resulted in perceiving mainly in the engineered reality, in the matrix, right? And note that I said perceiving mainly in the matrix, because our multidimensional DNA is here, right? It's just not very active, right? And we've had moments where we experience multidimensionality, but we discount it because of our entrenchment in the matrix and only believing that that is possible, right? So as the limitations, this hold on the two strands of DNA are lessened, and we turn our attention out of the matrix and into our source connection, our multidimensional DNA can be restored more and more, right? And this is what's going to be really good, and what we're going to talk about more and how to do that later. But the one things we need to realize is that we have been geared into becoming primarily consumers and participators in an engineered reality that supports other people's, desires and creations versus our own creations and our desires, and that of why we truly, are soul beings, and that we have different, if you want to say, purposes to live by. And once we turn ourselves out of that and unravel ourselves more and get more connected in our own source, we'll be able to do that much freer and live an incredible life. Yes, we have been victims and victimized by the other source controllers, and they've also installed programs to have us continue being in the creative consciousness of a victim. We need to get back into more solid alignment of our true source connection, not a fabricated, connected, or technology facsimile of the other source, right? And be creators in a multidimensional setting, right? Not the limited two-strand DNA engineered reality setting of the other source, right? So we can't linger in victim drama consciousness programs. We just need to realize what's happened, why I'm sharing it, acknowledge that it's happened, so then we can handle it and handle anything that pops up in our current life experiences to deal with, right? We're beings of pure love. And while in that connected force, the essence of us, others are affected by it and they pale around it, right? We have the power right here. Now, the key takeaways out of all that I've said so far in this section is that I want you to get that there is an other source. First and foremost, there is an other source. And secondly, there are many feeds in your mind and consciousness energetics that you have been indoctrinated to pay attention to connect with, to distract you, and that keeps you much less connected to your own source connection and your innate wisdom and abilities. They keep you connected to the material world that you can see and experience with your body senses, right? And not connected to the immaterial world or quantum world of infinite potentials that exist in your own source connection in that wondrous, magical place. So it's time to restore our abilities and the earth. This means we have to unravel ourselves from the engineered reality, the technology and consciousness, the traps of the other source. Everything is consciousness. Everything is light vibrating. Everything, therefore, has a frequency that can be felt and measured. And this is why I want to talk about Hawkins' map of consciousness and frequency levels, because it's one of the most important bits of information I want to share in this video. So let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and share the screen here and look at Hawkins' map of consciousness. All right, so you can see it ranges from 0 to 1,000, where 1,000's enlightenment. In fact, there's a range of 700 to 1,000 for enlightenment. And the first measured range at the bottom is 20, which is shame. Then it goes to 30, guilt, right? Guilt is also blame. So shame and blame at the lower 20 to 30 frequencies. 50 is apathy. 100 is fear. Anger is at 150. Courage 200. And then, you see other patterns where love then is at 500, right? So it's an amazing, beautiful thing to research. And one of the greatest things to realize here is that each frequency has a bandwidth, right? Where many things exist in the bandwidth of that frequency. If you vibrate at a frequency of fear, you'll have many different life experiences that exist in that bandwidth, including information and images that reflect that frequency of fear. Now, at a different frequency, there will be a bandwidth of different experience potentials, including also information and images that reflect that frequency level. So at different frequency levels, there are different bandwidths of potentials. So at fear, you'll have different potentials than at a level of peace. There's different programming also at each level. Now, the lower level frequencies have more density, more programming, more experience potentials. And because we've been living more in that level of frequency, there's more experiences for us to reference, to live by again, right? So there's a lot of different feeds of reality at these lower levels of frequency. And because there's so much more at those lower levels, then these then can be easier to manipulate, right? Through whatever means by the controllers to keep us referencing and to keep your attention going there and living from. Now, the engineered reality keeps you hooked at the lowest frequency levels of consciousness, 20 to 30, shame, blame, and guilt. Now, many say what's going on out there, I should say, is fear. It's all about fear. Well, it is. And the greatest fear we have is being shamed, humiliated, made to feel guilty or blamed for something, because it's a very low and unpleasant frequency vibration to experience, right? It definitely is. So many of who we call elite, our ruling class, they've been measured at the frequency of like 50, 55, which is apathy, right? And the main characteristic of that is manipulation, right? And they manipulate you by fear, and also by the fear of not wanting to be shamed or blamed, humiliated, or made to feel guilty. And of course, they manipulate by our goodness, right? Because we are good as humans, and they love manipulating that. Here's something very important as well. Many of the organizations that control world finances, health, politics, other different, agendas, if you want to say, they range in a bandwidth of 35 to 55. Okay, that is the level of guilt to, apathy, manipulation, right? And that's the same with the ruling class, the elite, that we see out there, some of those, many of those organizations as well, right? So they manipulate our actions and behaviors by referencing the frequency patterns that still reside in us, right? That have been, been unresolved, you want to say, right? Related to shame, blame, and guilt. And this is why we need to do that. We need to resolve our wounds and patterns so we can be free from manipulation, right? But one of the greatest things is, you will be free from these as you become more aware of the tactic being used against you here that triggers shame, blame, and guilt, and why I think this is the most important thing for you here in this video. And then once you know the tactic, you have a better chance to not to succumb, if you want to say, to the manipulation. Realize that the person or organization at the level of apathy manipulation is at that level because they have hidden wounds or agendas that they do not want to have to deal with, acknowledge, or resolve. So they have to keep you from triggering their wounds or finding out their wrongdoings. So they will do anything to shame and blame you to get you to a lower level than they are. Makes sense? Now, the way you stop, being shamed and blamed is with the awareness that I've just shared, but also by just going, stop, right? Which a lot of times when you just go, stop, you may have some anger behind it, which is above fear at 150, right? Anger is above fear. But of course, you cannot exhibit anger because that is bad, right? And what have they been doing over the last few decades? They've been demonizing anger. Okay, there has been a lot of images and propaganda about anger over the decades. And my bet is that you have some images of what anger looks like, which you don't like and you don't want to be, which is understandable. But let me share with you, anger is okay. Now, with me just saying that, and if it triggered something in you, different images or reactions, then I want you to take a look at that and acknowledge that there might be some conditioning that you have to be that way. And of course, sure, it's always best not to exhibit over the top anger, but when it's justified, it's okay. And, if, there was a reaction that you might have had, and there's some conditioning there related to anger, right? You might be submissive to being controlled, right? Especially if you ever express anger and then after doing that, if you feel any shame or guilt about exhibiting anger, you need to look at it, because I guarantee then you are submissive and you can be controlled. Because we should be able to authentically exhibit anger if it's just at that moment. Now, we totally should be very angry right now with all the narratives of deceit and control being impressed upon us to shame and blame us right now. In fact, anger is the energy needed to punch through that deceit and manipulation. Now, this anger is not a narrative-driven false anger where you go to the lengths to destroy, burn down buildings and cities. That's not anger. That's apathy and manipulation to further one's agenda. And it should never be allowed. Authentic anger is always allowed, and correct expression should never be suppressed. That's like suppressing joy. Okay, so level of consciousness. Okay, and when freely expressed from the centeredness of love, there is no wrong, right? Unless there is imaging, a behavior conditioning, that's wrong. And we'll talk more about that coming up. That's how they also control us, right? the images, holographic inserts, the propagandas, the narratives along those ways. And those got to be examined because I guarantee they all press on shame, blame, and guilt, right? And that's why I bring this up, because this is where they have kept us in humanity. And as long as they do, there's programs that are run to keep us in those levels. And we want to be at the level of love at all times, right? But anyways, we want to be able to express things, freely without shame, blame, and guilt. Let's put it that way, right? But anyways, just pause here for a second and just note all the different narratives that are out there that some turn into ideologies, but they're definitely there steering the direction of humanity and human consciousness, right? I mean, one that to me is pretty obvious is political correctness. To me, that's at this point in time, it's manipulation tactic, right? I mean, anyone that uses it, in my opinion, they're just trying to put you in a lower frequency position of making you stop. So if you say something quote unquote politically incorrect, they're immediately going to just stop you and put you down, and therefore you can't even talk to them on the even playing ground because they just put you down and called you out, right? But that's where you call them back and say, stop, I understand your tactic, it's not allowed, and you need to answer my question, especially when it's a political figure that's just a big manipulator, right? And that's the way that we're going to have to be. And sometimes it takes the energy and strength to do that. And I get it, and it can be scary because it is a strong energy. And until we do, from that place of connected lovingness too, of self, then we're going to continually be manipulated and shame, blamed, and guilted into submission, and then told to do whatever and never be an expert or authority in anything of our life because we need to be controlled by others that wish to control us, right? So there is, something here for you to do. But anyways, let's look at, other narratives. I mean, even propaganda, right? And that labels you or shames you and blames you, make you guilty, right? So things like, if you don't do such and such thing, then you're going to harm another, right? You're going to make them sick or kill them. So you could be labeled, right, an anti something. How many things are out there now of you being anti, or something's being anti something? So you're not being anti-group think or the agenda of where the controllers from manufacturing humanity to go, right? Or the other source is manufacturing you to go, right? So these are things to watch, but this is typical of any controlling behavior and what happens, right? Another, propaganda thing or something going out there being labeled. I mean, everything's being labeled racist right now, right? And unfortunately, it's just a tactic, to manipulate at this time. And it's real, and there's still remnants that exist, pains of it, but it's really being overused right now. And we know this. I mean, people that, definitely, awaken, they can see the tactic, right? And that's why it's real, shame is being used upon us to shame and blame us. But if anyone's using it, then we have to question their agenda, right? Even the thing, that, let's put it this way, I see different flyers on doors of people's businesses, right? And it has an image, right? It says, first of all, it says like, be kind, wear a mask with, an image of a mask, right? Well, believe it or not, this little thing, be kind, wear a mask, it contributes to our continued enslavement. Now you may think, well, that's a real innocent thing. How can that be, right? Well, we've been, of course, for thousands of years, been conditioned, right, of experiences of shame, blame, and guilt. And we will do almost anything to avoid having that experience again. Now, you may think that flyer's innocent, but it's not, and here's why. It implies that you're not kind unless you do and behave a certain way. And if you do not, take the action up as it's implying, then you're not kind, and shame on you. See what I'm saying? This participation in the frequency of shaming perpetuates the images, conditioning, and experiences of shame in our psyche and keeps us locked in extremely low frequency bandwidth that subjects you and all of us to run the programs impressed in our psyche without consciously realizing it. And we then can be unconsciously manipulated and directed to behave certain ways, therefore keeping us locked into being victims and not our greatness. So you really must examine your own actions and behaviors to see if they are in the frequency of shaming and blaming and making people feel guilty. And if they are, you're not only a slave, you are perpetuating humanity's enslavement by the other source, its technology, and the beings it controls. Are you hearing me? You see, the shame, blame, and guilt frequency in us can go unnoticed. And I hope that this next example can bring some awareness to what I'm talking about. In my sessions, I have a lot of clients that are moms. And this is what brought my awareness to shame and blame was with moms, that I was having sessions with. They would reiterate over and over being, concerned or bothered by wanting to keep their children safe, right? Mainly safe and secure, but they kept reiterating in the session. Well, knowing, that frequency is a thing and you resolve from a weakness or a weak frequency, and not just because someone's so concerned about it, it doesn't mean it's really the thing. Their energy was indicating that there was something underlying that obsessive concern of keeping the children safe. Now, of course, we want to keep our children safe, but that's not what was really bothering them, driving the behavior to be obsessive and overly concerned, right? So the underlying thing that was there that had to be resolved was, the concern of being shamed and blamed by people close to them. That could be friends, family members, but people close to them, right? So if anything happened to their children, especially any decisions that they would make, man, they would just feel so ashamed, right? They would blame themselves. That's what was being obsessive. And once we resolve those things related to shame and blame, then there wasn't this obsessive concern to keep the children safe. You understand what I'm getting at? So we need to look at those behavior patterns for yourself. Is there something running with shame and blame and guilt that has you keep spinning and reiterating things where you think it's something, but it's really the shame, blame, guilt underlying, avoidance of feeling those things, right? So that's something to really look at. And one of the things that, we need to realize is that we must stop perpetuating our low frequency patterns of shame, blame, and guilt on each other, because it just keeps you and us in the programming, right? In the mind, in the emotional mechanisms that we're not consciously aware of, right? So we must listen, right? We need to pause and listen to ourselves and feel if we're perpetuating the shame, blame, and guilt. And we need to stop, right? Because the new world is not going to hold those low level frequency patterns like it has been. And if you or anyone insists on using tactics and narratives that perpetuate keeping humanity enslaved at these levels, then just leave the planet, right? Because we will not be, able to continue that way. And you will not be able to continue to live in high frequency beingness where we are taking the planet, right? We're creating a planet at a much higher frequency. And anyone that perpetuates those lower frequencies are not going to be able to exist. So what must we do, right? We have to resolve and transcend any attachments to the experiences, images, identities, beliefs related to shame, blame, and guilt. I mean, it's really that simple. And once we do, then those hooks are out of the influences of engineered reality, and it's going to be more difficult for any feeds to influence you to create an imbalance that gets you going in a certain direction that would be off center from what is really, the direction you should be going. Right? Now, I also want to point something else out here. So I want to bring up the map of consciousness again, because I think it's really important to show you that, these beings or the other source that created the technology of engineered reality, they do not understand love. So the engineered reality has to fabricate or simulate love, joy, peace, and enlightenment, right? Anything above love, anything they don't understand, it has to fabricate and simulate these, right? And they do this as sensations, right? Or triggering responses through images. So whereas this is different than our organic sacred matrix, right, of nature, and our source is filled with genuine experiences of our source creative essence expressing, right? Love, joy, peace, enlightenment. That's an organic source, thing. Again, in the engineered reality, it's more simulated and fabricated, right? Through sensations and responses to images. It's kind of like a virtual reality game, and you're sensing and feeling these things, but it's simulated versus a true organic sensing of it, right? And this is a key. I mean, we need to get back solidly into our own source connection and out of the matrix energetics of the other source, period. So frequency and understanding that game is important. All right, let's move on to narratives. How many narratives and beliefs are out there that direct your behaviors and ways of living, especially ones that keep us in the frequency of shame, blame, and guilt, like those narratives in our religions and spiritual circles, our politics, our governments, science, medical, education, and social justice engineering. And I'm talking about, narratives that are centuries and thousands of years old, not just the current ones. Well, I want you to start to challenge the narratives and beliefs, because I guarantee a vast majority of them are geared to wrap you into the matrix and use your consciousness to create a manufactured reality that is extremely limiting. And this is the realization that I want you to come to realize. And I also want you to awaken to the fact that our mind has been hijacked. The mind of the human being was once upon a time of a free and beautiful beacon of light. And at that time, every human being was a satellite of joy, presence, living in the moment, and free. And her mind was very much entwined with animals and nature. The mind has been hijacked, impressed with images, each with a program to direct behavior responses and to condition pattern behaviors. Today, there are many constant feeds into the mind. There are recorded conditioned behavior patterns wired in like software programs, and images that pop up that provide information and behavior responses. Just reflect on what I said there. Now, I've referenced this as the lower mind or matrix mind, while recognizing the fact that our mind is also still connected to our original universal network as well, and why we need to unravel from the matrix mind that we have been indoctrinated to constantly reference as if it was our source, and acknowledging that technology has been used against us. Most likely, this is why Buddha said, no mind. I also had a teacher that would resolve so many physical issues and symptoms on the spot. And his teachings are, no mind, delete it out of the body, and send your mind to other dimensions, other universes, other existences, other time, space, places. Now, I did not understand what that truly meant or why we did it during learning his modality. It wasn't until I saw and recognized the engineered reality technology and its energetics, which again, I described as being in its own space-time within our third and fourth dimension. And therefore, why you would send your mind, right, to other dimensions, universes, and other time, space, places, right? And it's because our mind is entrenched in the matrix, this engineered reality. And the intelligence of our physical body can actually deal with this reality better without the matrix mind attachments. So send it away, but also delete the attachments and feed, or I should say the feeds of your mind out of your body and your consciousness. Now, there's ways to do that, and that's a whole nother subject. But here's the other thing that, the teacher used to say: the mind is not the brain, right? Therefore, that's why you can send it away. The brain is physical, and why you would work with the intelligence of your physical body, and the mind is non-physical, right? So the brain's physical, the mind is non-physical. And even your intelligent agencies refer to the mind as a hologram. Okay. Now this is, why you want to say my teacher and the Buddha said no mind, because it's in and of the matrix, right? So of course we have mind, but we want not to be attached or influenced of the matrix mind, right? Now, they both knew that you and your awareness has been conditioned to reference the storehouse of the mind, which locks you into numerous types of feeds and centuries of programming, right? And it controls you, and others can control your mind, therefore controlling your behaviors and decisions, and potentially your overall well-being. When working with people, which I do over the phone, I could see with my other sensory perceptions where their awareness would go. I would watch their awareness go to the mind to store data or information to reference versus to feel and be in the moment. Okay, to also, I would see them reference logic area of the mind and realize that logic can actually be very illogical, especially pertaining to different circumstances that one wishes to work on, right, or to improve. You can't always go to stored data or use logic. Okay, and we can share more about that later. The mind is a beautiful thing, and we are locked into too much of it, and of course not in the moment-to-moment presence and live feed with our source that we're a spark of, living inspirationally. And why, there's a rise, if you want to say, in mental health problems or conditions because of the inner conflict of knowing and connected to your source versus the many feeds of the other source and the matrix mind, right? There's this difference of pull, and we're not handling anymore. And there is a concern of mine that this reality, of course, has been manufactured for you to see and experience things that do not reflect your greatness and that of humanity's. It makes you seem less than, by design, of course. In fact, one narrative that I want to point out that always puts you in a position of being less than and never being enough is what I call lessons ideology, where everything's a lesson, right? And they never seem to end. In fact, I have seen in my clients that their beliefs were so strong in this ideology that they would unconsciously create more experiences to learn from. And why this is a problem. Because normally associated with a lesson is some sort of pain, and some sort of pain to learn from, right? So, and I should say, and because my clients were on this spiritual or self-development path, they have this intense desire to greater enlightenment. And of course, because of this intensity, they were all about, learning. And unfortunately, pain associated with that. So here's my enlightenment, here's my enlightenment advice: just stop. Yes, we do live, and there are experiences that can, of course, learn from that make us, wiser, but we need to stop putting a construct of what, was learned or some sort of reasoning for having an experience, because we're just perpetuating loops of potentials that have pains in them, right? And of course, the controllers of this engineered reality would love for you to experience more pain. And another reason why we need to drop this narrative or this lessons ideology, right? Just experience life with openness and less attachment of meaning, right? And realize, of course, that the engineered reality wants to make sure you see that you are less than. And so you can be controlled, right? And as soon as you learn enough, then you can advance. But until then, you're less than, right? And maybe someday, if you learn enough, you can be a big boy or girl like the controllers, right? So that's why we have to drop it. Live in an experience, but there does not mean that there has to be a new construct of a reason for the pain that you just experienced, right? Let's not perpetuate that. And realize that, it doesn't mean that our original plan was not for our soul development in this physical reality of Earth, how it was originally designed, but realize that, it was hijacked, right? And the lessons on Earth, in this hijacked version is just to keep you in a perpetual loop of enslavement, right? So this is another reason why we let go of it. But thankfully, of course, these dynamics, what again, that I refer to as engineered reality, is being lifted and dismantled, right? And why I'm doing this video, so you can understand where we've been and what we need to do, right? So let's continue. We are definitely indoctrinated or conditioned, right, to look into the mind, to reference stored data and information, to reference images and the programming behind the images, to reference our intellect, which can be limited if it's the intellect of indoctrinated information. And we have to question who drafted the data that we keep referencing, right? And we're also, conditioned to, of course, reference our experiences, especially painful and more intense ones, right? To reference beliefs. And unfortunately, our beliefs do not reflect our greatness and our true abilities because they've been born out of this limited experiences in this limited engineered reality, right? So we need to start dropping our beliefs and letting go of our experiences, right? Now, we've also been conditioned here now to reference and search for answers on the internet. And is that really giving you the best answers? Or is it the ideal answers for the engineers, right? So another thing that you may not, be aware of is that implants are being put in your bioelectric field and in your mind via your phone and other electrical devices that affect your behaviors. And especially if you have unresolved wounds or unresolved negative experiences and many other programs from images. We must move our attention back to our own personal resource, our own personal instructions, our own personal guidance and inspirations with our source, which is especially hard to do if we do not realize that there's a reality that is very limited, that our consciousness and creative essence is entangled in, and that there is an other source. Another reason why I'm sharing this. See, humans used to do what we would consider as superhuman now if we see them. And just remember, again, our history has been deleted, period. It's been rewritten. There's no doubt about it. There's plenty of evidence for that. Another narrative that I want to talk about is, the narrative that the condition of the planet is the fault of you humans. It's not completely true. Yes, if you look at our history during this time period of our hijacking, right, in this engineered reality time period, yes, it reflects humans doing some really bad things to each other. However, our minds were infiltrated, our emotions manipulated, technology that you don't see used against us, genetically modified, hybridized humans put in power to rule us, plus beings that look human, that weren't actually humans doing bad things to other humans. The original humans were loving, connected, harmonious, and would never do evil and selfish things to each other. Never. The history we remember or indoctrinated with, unfortunately, does not reflect this. You need to understand this. You need to open your awareness and see a broader perspective. I would say try to remember, but our memories were wiped. However, our memories still exist in the consciousness of Earth, and we can recall them through this connection. Now, Buddha also talked about attachments. And I have to ask you, what is your consciousness attaching to? This is the awareness that we need to start getting into to see where our consciousness, where our attachments are, so we can start unraveling from them. One of my teachers says, believe in nothing, believe in everything. And why? Because our beliefs are attachments. And unfortunately, they're in this engineered reality experiences. And whatever your awareness is attaching to, what its attention is on, directs your creative essence and energy to create, to perpetuate. Believe in nothing, so there will be no attachments to the engineered reality that we have experienced for thousands of years. Believe in everything. So our awareness, our attention, our creative essence goes into the quantum field of infinite potentials and constantly creating something new and different. This is what we're supposed to be doing anyways. We attach too much. We try to make things solid in a universe where nothing's solid. Also want to talk about the narrative or concept that there is evil and good, and that the evil is just part of the one, the all of this existence. Well, yes, it is just part of this existence in the engineered reality. And this narrative of it is to have you normalize evil and justify that evil is just here so we can learn. That you just need to accept it and be okay with living in it. It's just part of love, which is the essence of everything. No. This is an infiltrated narrative. So you accept evil, that you normalize it, and you not search for the perpetrators, right? The engineers, the controllers of the engineered reality. Don't look, right? So that's why this narrative's here. To normalize it, justify it. And even though, again, you see human beings doing bad things over thousands of years, right? It's due to the splicing into our organic original existence and changing us and constant influencing and feeds within our energetics, mind and energy fields to keep us less attached to our source and our conscious energetics in engineered reality, right? So that we're constantly creating an energy that is a resource for those other beings and other source. And if you look at how things have been going over the last few years, people have really been, doing a lot of wonderful things for each other. And at the same time, the other controller's not. Can we do better? Yes. And remember, love is just entering this planet again, so we will. I mean, face it, the other source and the controllers manipulate our goodness. As a reference, let's talk about controlling people. They will always assume that their needs, desires, wants, and purposes are always more important than whatever yours are. And even though the more sly controlling people may not say that directly to you, they will prey upon other people's empathy and compassion. As human beings, our unresolved negative emotional wounding often clouds our discernment, making it very difficult to see the reality behind hidden agendas and motives in different forms of behavior. There's no question about it. The whole shame, blame, guilt scenario I already mentioned, right? We can be easily manipulated through both our unresolved pains and our goodness. Some people, like our genetically engineered ruling class, are so concerned with what they want and have such an inflated concept of their own importance that they have no conscience about manipulating and deceiving others. Some of the most common manipulation techniques used by controlling people and in the narratives, in the engineered reality are things like lying, just outright lying to you. Double speak is another one. And just because they use words like democracy doesn't mean they actually mean that. They will say whatever they need to say to get you to side with them at the moment. Another one is guilt trips, especially if you don't agree with them. If you doubt them, question them, or simply don't believe them. And if you do any of these, you are the problem and they will demonize you. Call you the liar and speak in untruths or misinformation, threaten you and your loved ones, and may even physically harm you or someone you love. Controlling people manipulate by also being vague to purposely create confusion. Pretending to want to help you. And of course, they will shame you if you don't allow them to manipulate you or accept their false kindness, compassion, or care. And of course, they have no accountability, right? I mean, it's like, don't look here, nothing to see here. And we believe it because it comes from an established authority figure or media that is supposedly fact-checked and only shares unbiased facts, right? And they say, yeah, don't look here, but look over here. This is where you need to put your energy and your attention. This is the real problem. And of course, our attention goes there and starts wrapping into that, conscious and creative energy that then perpetrates it out there in the collective consciousness, right? We have to recognize that our goodness and our empathy for others is being used against us. Playing with our emotions and fears, especially the painful ones of being shamed, blamed, and made to feel guilty. You have to put up your hand and your energy and say, stop. It may be difficult to use your energy to forcefully say stop, especially if you're afraid of the pushback, right? And yet we must. This time in our evolutionary stage, it's about saying no to manipulators and to the pawns of the controlling elite, and to the elite ruling class that is owned by the other source and beings. Your priority is not the narratives they create. It is important to be a loving, compassionate, and caring human being, but not a doormat to be kicked around as a direct result of emotional and psychological manipulation. We have the right to defend our own sense of space that belongs to us and have the capacity to exist without being used as a doormat for others' manipulation. The controllers, the ruling class elite, clearly disagree with this freedom. Realize the engineering of this reality separates all things and makes them at odds with each other. And the things, beings, or technology of the other source goes unnoticed. And the chaos created powers the beings and the other source. It's what I call the third person influence that's actually creating the problems and causing chaos that is hidden, goes unnoticed and seemingly innocent, especially when we can't see it with our physical eyes. And of course, our sensing suppressed and minimalized, so we can't sense the frequency fences in the narratives in our condition. Bringing a little bit of science, if you want to say, the spectrum of light of the physical universe, it has a very wide range, but humans can only see but a small bandwidth of it with their eyes. And why you are indoctrinated to only believe what you can see with your eyes or experience with your physical senses, and only believe the data we feed you, only believe the science we feed you, the proof we give you. Don't believe any of your other sensory perceptions. because they're not real. You must start questioning the narratives and beliefs humanity has been living in for thousands of years, current and old. Like even the narratives that the earth is round, or the narrative that the earth is flat. Perhaps it's neither. One of the most entrapping mechanisms in the engineered reality of your consciousness and creative energy are the identities and stereotypes, the personas you attach to. If you were asked, who are you? What would present itself to be that answer? What images, what identities, what personas? Whatever it is not who you are. The ego is technology of the engineered reality. And one function of the ego is that it holds the programs of stereotypes and identities. I have heard other teachers refer to this stereotypes and identity programs as being what they call the personality matrix. Now, these stereotypes and identities are like software programs of images with programmed set of behavior patterns that is referenced, each having different versions based on one's culture, based on one's belief systems, and so forth. And they are modifiable based on the environment and current live human collective consciousness upgrades. Again, technology. So when you step into an identity and you label or identify with an identity, you're putting your creative juices and consciousness into being that identity. This then subjects you to many feeds, such as past actual experiences and results of any identity, beliefs and opinions about past identities, projected expectations and behaviors that are expected out of you of any identity, and of course, social engineering and manipulation. For instance, one of my favorite references to use is in examples of moms. But let's give you the identity of a good mom. So what are the projected expectations and behaviors of you being a good mom? What are the beliefs and opinions of you and others close to you? What has been your past experiences of what a good mom is? And how can you be socially engineered and manipulated to fit the identity you hold of a good mom? I mean, this is the same that goes for any identity, right? I mean, being a good Christian, Muslim, Jew, what are the projected expectations? What's the beliefs and opinions? What's the past experiences? And what's the social engineering that can manipulate you to being that good thing, right? And this, of course, also applies to race and gender identity. What are the projected expectations and behaviors, beliefs and opinions, past experiences, and social engineering and manipulation? Or your political affiliation. It seems that the group mental consciousness out there is that you must choose who you are. So we can reference our stored data of programmed identities and get an image in our mind of how to relate to you, how to react to you, and of course, how to treat you. One thing is for sure nowadays, it is all about labeling And the purpose is to box you in, to curtail your wholeness and your sovereignty, and to make you much, much less than you truly are. This is the overall purpose of the engineered reality, to box you in and use your creative essence for the purpose of the others, not yours. Here's an important distinction I want you to understand. Are you subject to the conditioning of an identity? Or are you using the identity to play in the engineered reality? Subject to means you are influenced by all projected expectations, beliefs, and opinions, past experiences, and social engineering of the identity. Whereas using the identity, you are free from any program conditioning to play in the matrix. It is an important distinction, and I suggest you reflect on the identities you identify as being, so you can be freed from their programming. I made reference to earlier that the ego is a technology of the engineered reality. And I also made reference, the engineered reality is mainly technology driven, with a veil and many frequency fences within the veil. Well, I have only heard one other person say what I'm about to reveal. The other person is a successful spiritual coach and psychic. And what I want to reveal is that the ego is artificial intelligence. Our consciousness in the engineered reality is locked into the personality matrix versus our soul matrix. Or another way to say it is that our consciousness is in the ego identity programs of the other source versus the live feed of your own source connection. Our awareness has been diverted to live in the matrix along with our creative essence to perpetuate it. And we have been unaware of it until now. Hopefully this example will help clarify what I want you to realize. Humility. When someone is truly exhibiting humility, they are strongly in the alignment of their source connection. Can you feel it? Yes. And this is different, right, than someone in the ego personification of the other source technology simulation of being humble. Can you feel the distinction of the humility of being in our source connection versus the ego personification of the technology simulation of being humble? Can you feel what I'm saying? The artificial intelligence of the ego engages in to how you feel about yourself, your experiences, and it fires and activates to keep you locked into different personas based on how you feel about yourself, like if you don't feel accepted. The ego then, this artificial intelligence, reads this and will make sure it gives you a persona to hold on to display, to make you feel accepted. This is how it locks you into the personality matrix, to give you an identity and one that you can feel good about. And of course, there are other identities that are not very pleasant to have, but they are also based on how you feel about yourself. Now also, realize that when you have a release or a gain in some sort of healing modality or enhanced awareness session, the ego seems to again activate, and it generates something that creates doubt or a disturbance or distraction. It is something we've all experienced that we reference as like being knocked back down. Something just seems to happen, right? Something that seems to knock us back down off our recent awakening, if you want to say, or our recent realizations about ourselves. Well, knowing this, don't fall for the traps, right? And go into drama, right? Don't recycle more dramas. Stay in good alignment with your own source connection and all that just awakened in yourself, right? But this is also why the use of medical injectable technology has been ramping up, because we are waking up and realizing a lot. And the controllers of the matrix needs to keep your awareness locked into a reality they have been engineering for their own survival with new technology. The good news is that the technology, the veil, is being lifted, or is being gradually diminished, if you want to say, as is the artificial intelligence of the ego. My question is, as the ego goes, which again controls many identities and personas, who are you without those feeds? Who are you without those feeds, that constant frequency programming? Because your consciousness has been wrapped into this technology, and we seem to perpetuate our past programming. You will most likely continue to act and behave and create from your recordings. And if you do, you still are not free. Freedom comes from being in your own source connection, activating more of your multidimensional DNA and unraveling yourself and your consciousness from what has been, from the technologies of engineered reality. Plus, you realizing your consciousness is the greatest technology. Your consciousness is the greatest technology, especially in the alignment with your source, living the life you came here to live. And you cannot live the life of another's identity or persona, especially that of another source. To live the life of another is betrayal of your own personal instructions from your source, and leaves you open to invasion and negative control if you do not close the gap. This is why the ego and the personality matrix technology was designed and employed on us to get you off of the alignment of your own source. And of course, all the indoctrination programs. It was almost 2 decades ago when I started to hear in spiritual circles everyone talking about oneness. And something just did not sit right with me about that. I could feel there was a hidden agenda that was being perpetrated on our mass consciousness. Now, there is oneness, and we really feel that when we are in strong connection with our source, as we feel that we are one with all things. There's no question about it. But remember what I mentioned earlier, that the engineered reality is controlled by another source, a source that is different than the source you are a spark of, or that of which your true essence is a part of. And that the beings that control the engineered reality are of another source. We are not one with them. We have our own source, they have theirs, and the two cannot mix. There is oneness, but not all are one in the engineered reality. So don't be mesmerized and repeat the program. We are all one. We are all one. Remember, the engineered reality, your consciousness and creative essence is perpetuating it. Your mind has been hijacked and your attention is directed to look and experience in reality with your limited 2 strands of DNA. And that is mainly technology driven. And you are not your body. The narratives that direct your attention in the engineered reality are that of the other source. We have been under like a spell, right? Under a veil, filled with many different images, conditioned programming, and frequency fences to limit consciousness. The narratives out there right now reflect a lot of group think. You need to think like this, and if you don't, there's a lot of strong negative energy coming at you to get you to rethink your position. Not very loving energy. We are beings of pure love, as is our source. The other source does not understand love. It likes group think or hive mind mentality. I ask you, what are you one with? The other source or one with your own source? What are you in alignment with? Where is your consciousness? What if the other source is artificial intelligence? Are you one with a machine? Or are you one with pure love? What are you one with? Where is your alignment? Where is your consciousness? Transhumanism has been around for thousands of years, not just now. Mainstream science supports it. Universal science does not. Where is your consciousness? Where is your alignment? What are you one with? This is the whole purpose of my video, for you to awaken and to answer those questions. Why is there so much focus on DNA? There are a few reasons. One focus on DNA is all about selection and reducing you to the information apparently recorded in a particular aspect of your biology. But realize you can never reduce our value, the quality of our life, and how advanced we are simply to the extrication, replacement, and enhancement of a part of our biology. Who you are is not determined by biology alone. The fixation on the quality of our genes, or the thinking that all answers lie in the modification of your DNA and your RNA, is the obsession of the beings, the ruling class elites, and the other source. Do realize there is an agenda to produce a certain type of human, half not human, more fit for purpose, and not for your greater purpose. Recalling what I shared before about the history of beings experimenting on humans. So once again, wanting to design a human sentient cyborg who will answer to its controller, which can process information, but never think outside the box. Wired to a technology from the inside out. This new human cyborg will be malleable and suggestible. And for this experiment to fully take place, humans must have the agent introduced into their body, which will begin to wrap them around a different source of instructions. A synthetic programmable human, enhanced through a program of medical injections, and upgraded with implants and other holographic image programming technology. Sounds like what we're going through right now. Now, our current task is to become more quantum, more multidimensional, more out of the 3D limited view. And of course, more connected and aligned with our source. Our DNA is a light-bearing apparatus, and it is important. And it is important to understand more about our DNA from a much broader and holistic point of view. DNA is the master synchronizer of the human body, not the brain. It is the DNA that is responsible for consciousness, not the brain or gene sets. Now you hear the term DNA strands. Well, in the cell, the DNA is actually more of a loop. A composite of DNA is comprised of seemingly spiraling ladders wrapped around spiraling ladders, And it then actually clumps around itself to form a loop. Now, it should be noted that the double helix nature of DNA is a spiral combined with a counter opposing spiral. The double helix simultaneously spirals in both directions at the same time. This is important to note how it spirals around and even in both directions, because in electricity, when one magnetic field overlaps another, it is called inductance. What's important about inductance is it allows for the amplification of voltage and it allows for the communication of signals through magnetic fields without wires and without an added noise or anomalies. Pretty important, right? The loop shape and spiraling design wrapped around each other and flowing in different directions is what makes it possible for all the trillions of your DNA to be in sync and communication with each other at the same time. There's no chemical racing around between the trillions of DNA molecules giving them the same message, nor is there any electrical synapses touching them and giving them a spark of data. And the DNA in your little toe is no different than the DNA in your brain. Every DNA molecule knows the plan of you and they will talk to each other singing in harmony. So how does inductance work in your body? Well, between the DNA loops of each cell, right? So each loop, right, of DNA has a magnetic field that overlaps loop in the cell next to it, which overlaps the cell in the next to it, right? So these trillions of overlaps equals one single consciousness. This then represents a magnetic imprint, which humans carry around with them. So you can say we have a signature frequency, and we definitely do. And your scientists and researchers know this, that each person's DNA has a signature frequency. They know they can identify you by your DNA frequency. And here's a little nefarious thing. They also have the technology to send a message, let's say from even a satellite in the same frequency of your DNA, where this message will only hit you. And of course, have you adjust behaviors or get a message, only you, based on your frequency of your DNA, and them sending the message via that signature frequency. Russian scientists stated that there is an unexplainable consciousness or energetic intelligence about the DNA. They discovered that DNA actually has a multidimensional field around it, and that the DNA was susceptible to receiving information from an outside source that actually gave instructions. They proved that the nature of reality is well beyond that what meets the eye, and that is for sure. Only 10% of our DNA is being used for building proteins. These are the gene producing parts of the DNA, the chemistry codes of the DNA. And get this, they are simply slaves to the 90% of the DNA that is doing the talking per se, the communicating, right? So the 90% originally labeled as junk are not junk. But what makes us very unique, right? DNA is multidimensional. Almost 90% of our DNA is not needed for protein synthesis, but rather is essentially used for communication. These same scientists prove that our DNA communicates not only with us, it also communicates with the DNA of other people. And we know that our DNA is connected with everything that is. DNA is a crossroads of God and man, the mixture of quantum and non-quantum. So you can say 90% of your DNA is a reflection of your spirituality. Now, in each DNA molecule, there is a mini portal that leads you to a multidimensional universe. This mini portal within DNA is the key, for it connects the human being with all that is, and therefore the DNA becomes a portal of connection with spirit itself, and it is never without this connection. Theory says to accomplish the communication of DNA of one person with another person's DNA, the DNA uses wormholes, which exist in hyperspace. Now, because of these wormholes, the distance between us and the person affected by our resonance frequency is irrelevant. All information that we send out is sent in hyperspace through these energetic tunnels and immediately comes to the target to be received and used by the local DNA. Okay, and this is why healers do not have to be in the physical presence to have a physical effect on your body, even if it's across the other side of the planet. And I have done that myself. Now, the results of the study, or one aspect of the study with these scientists, is that they prove that DNA changes its form based on the feelings emitted by each of the researchers. For example, when the researchers felt approval, love, or even drunkenness, the DNA responded with relaxation. The DNA strings opened up, which means they became longer. Where in contrast, when the researchers felt frustration, anxiety, anger, or stress, the DNA strands became shorter and shut off many of its codes. In other words, the DNA reacted to negative feelings by pulling itself together. Negative feelings simply shut us off to our quantum and multidimensional reality and diminishes our light and our energetic resources. In fact, we know that living in stress or survival mode depletes our magnetic field. It pulls it in, turning our body into more chemistry, more density, right? And therefore, why out there in the engineered reality, there's a lot of narratives of fear, shame, guilt, blame. So then we close ourselves off, right, to our multidimensionality, our connection with source, spirit, quantum reality. So why it's so important to not be involved in the narratives of fear and shame and blame and guilt, because you are closing yourself off to greatness. It is important to note that the DNA is listening to human consciousness, waiting for us to work with it and give it information, which is our communication and also high frequency communication from others and other intelligent sources. Us doing consciousness or spiritual practices is important. And if we don't, the DNA is just resting, doing the automatic things within the body. Our non-quantum DNA, the 10% DNA, the DNA that only mainstream science references and the DNA that they want to modify, that DNA, our non-quantum DNA cannot initiate any action on its own. It is reactive, not proactive. Okay, the chemical-based DNA will change based on its environmental experiences, though, right? It's outside. Now, DNA responds to inaudible and audible sounds, and a particular note is to the sound of our own voice. Now, this was proven scientifically where language frequencies, such as words, which are sounds, were used successfully to repair damaged DNA. Yes, repair damaged DNA. We can influence and reprogram our genes by introducing new information to our DNA in the form of words and frequencies, and connecting with higher intelligent and divine beings in many various ways without having to decode our DNA. In the absence of new information, our DNA will default to the existing programs and messages defined in our existing biological and quantum inheritance. Even mainstream science, though, have concluded that you can indeed talk to your genes. Thus, it is no longer considered bizarre talking to your DNA, to your organs, and to other body parts. The engineered reality has had you believing you are less than. You are not. You can start upgrading yourself and activating more of your multidimensionality by connecting with and communicating with your DNA. My partner shared with me something she read a few months ago by a famous channel, and he said, time is a trap. This can mean a few things. One aspect in which time is a trap is this: we experience in time, and we tend to attach to our experiences. We tend to attach our consciousness energy to experiences in time, and therefore creating a bond in time past. In our experiences, we have emotions and sensations and reactions to the experience that we may hold on to. Creating this energetic bond and feed of experiential information back into our stream of current consciousness, which could, of course, influence our current behavior patterns. And realize that these same emotions and sensations and reactions can accumulate. And that's really key, that they can accumulate, right? Which then may have more of an influence on our current behavior patterns and responses. And it also depends on then the intensity of the accumulations. So overall, this is one aspect of how time is a trap, how we attach to our experiences. And of course, the intensity of how we attach is the key, as is the amount of accumulations of our bonds. As I mentioned before, the engineered reality is structured in a time mechanism. So anytime you are experiencing in time, you're in the mechanics of the matrix or the engineered reality. Out of time is being in presence, in quantum potentiality, where time does not exist. Presence, then, is timeless. And when in presence, the live feed of our source is more prevalent. The concept of present now is a reflection of moments in time. Past and future are experiences and projections in time. Being in presence is timeless, a very important distinction between presence and present moments, which are in time. Note that there are no attachments in presence unless you hold on to something while you are in presence, you go back and hold on to something, creating an energetic bond of consciousness to reflect upon in time. See what I'm saying? A couple of years ago, I was awakening in the realizations of the engineered reality. And it came to me that we should possibly be on a 13-month calendar cycle to reflect more of the cosmos timing patterns instead of a 12-month calendar cycle. And shortly after that insight, I also discovered that there were actually 13 constellations in the sky versus 12 being recognized in mainstream Western tropical astrology. Along with realizing that on the day I was born, the sun's position in the sky was actually in the constellation of Sagittarius and not in the constellation of Capricorn. Now, according to mainstream Western tropical astrology, I am a Capricorn. However, according to the skies, I am a Sagittarius. Isn't your sun sign a key reflection of one's personality and a key basis of astrology interpretation of your life patterns, and interpretive projection of your life based on your sun sign? So am I a Sagittarius or a Capricorn? It depends on what astrology you wish to use. Now, also knowing that when you are being born and coming through the birth canal, we are actually imprinted with what is known as an astrological and magnetic imprints that influence our soul, our light, and our arcing of light. Now, my question is, at birth, is that imprint of the actual planets and stars in the sky, or is it an imprint of a modified reflection of the cosmos in an astrological mechanism by the engineers of the engineered reality? I have come to realize that the engineered reality has many mechanisms using frequencies to influence your beingness and patterns of behaviors to limit your consciousness and its expansion via frequency fences, and using technology like that of the ego and the personality matrix. So why wouldn't they use a modified astrological magnetic imprint that cuts you off from the wholeness and imprint from the actual cosmos? And therefore, putting your consciousness in a space and time coordinate setting that they can control and use your energetics as a resource for their own survival and well-being. I especially believe this was done on purpose after finding out that the constellation they removed is called Ophiuchus, which I have heard being referenced as both the wisdom holder and the gateway of man. It seems to me that the engineers are using, by design, modified versions of astrology to imprint into your DNA, your genetic material, to reflect certain patterns they want you to live by versus the organic patterns of nature. Now, I came across confirmation of my realizations at a trusted website where it stated that both the 12-month Western Gregorian time calendar and the 12 constellation Western tropical astrology are systems that have been generally used to suppress consciousness and suppress true knowledge of the stars and humanity's relationship to the stars. And that these systems are used to repeat broken patterns and remain stuck in the old timelines, which makes total sense to me, knowing how the engineers use many different technologies and frequencies tools to keep us entrapped. And I want you to realize that we must be pretty special and powerful if they have to use so much against us to keep us suppressed. Now, my advice for you is to start to wean off of using Western tropical astrology as a descriptor or projection of your life. So your consciousness and creative energy doesn't stay in the mechanisms of this technology and the other technologies of the engineered reality and all of its consciousness enslaving traps and patterns. However, still use Western astrology to assist you in discovering particular limiting life patterns that exist due to the imprint of this into your DNA. So use it from that aspect of looking at things to see what kind of limiting patterns exist because of the imprint, and then change your DNA and your life based on what we shared before in the DNA section. Now realize the more one understands how these patterns have influenced one's mind, body, emotions, ego preferences, body and medical history, the more informed one is to use this astrology to assist in resolving, healing, and eradicating these obsolete and inorganic patterns, freeing more of your consciousness and enhancing your life's overall well-being. This does not eradicate Western or other forms of astrological science and method. This actually indicates to us that we are in an evolutionary transition, and it is undergoing right now, and why this information is coming into your awareness. And please realize, I'm not saying that Western tropical astrology is wrong or inaccurate. In fact, it is extremely accurate, and I have used it many times myself throughout my life in my awakening path. What I am reflecting is that it's being used as a mechanism of the engineers to program our essence and consciousness to be in the reality that they have engineered for their benefit. It is another technology used to cut us off of our true organic essence and beingness. And you may want to bring up that such and such, devise this method to be used with the seasons and the purpose of the people at that time. And I get all that, but realize it is a story, a narrative that is rational and has realistic, practical application use at the time of the creation of the narrative. And it is used to prove supposedly why it was created. However, many narratives are derived that we wrap into, that we then create a reality we live by, that we even come to call the truth, even though it could just be a story or a narrative to perpetuate the engineered reality. Now, also, I don't want a bunch of comments coming back at me defending this astrology. I am hoping that my video has opened your eyes and expanded your awareness enough to say, oh my, I really need to look at everything with more open awareness, right? And see what's here. Oh my gosh, right? Because we have been hijacked, right? And infiltrated and experimented on and made to feel less than. And at the same time, realize how incredible we must be, how incredible humanity must be to have all these things created and implemented to suppress and entrap us. Start to unravel and free your consciousness. Don't waste time defending the beliefs, narratives, or technology that has been used against us. Use this technology to assist on your journey to freedom. Here are the two most important things for you to do right now. First, be still. Get in the alignment and strong connection with your own source. And the second one is dreaming, which is being creators in alignment with our own inspirations as we have become consumers and participators in an other source reality that drains our resources and limits our true abilities and overall well-being. It is of crucial importance that you align yourself with and become congruent with your inner spirit, your own source connection, your own source of inspiration, and let that guide your course of daily actions as reflected by your thoughts and emotional states to reflect this spirit of divine source. This means we are returning to the living light of the divine source that connects us to the space-time continuum associated with a point of origin of all there is. And in stillness, when you think nothing is happening, everything is happening. Being still in this connection will start to purify away the entanglements of the engineered reality and help you to become more aware. This is not just about meditating. It is about connecting, and why I like to call them connection practices, because you are using your awareness, connecting within, not zoning out, but being very consciously aware of self and your source connection in stillness. Consistently doing connection practices will help you to stay in alignment and in live inspirational feed, synchronistic and abundant living. At my website, check out the info on the Be Still gatherings and the recordings that are available that will assist you in connecting with your own source connection and assisting you with enhancing your body consciousness energetics. Plus, in the same section of my website, there are 21 days of dreaming. We did this for 21 days because it takes 21 days to form a new habit. The new habit is creating or dreaming in the alignment with your own source connection, and then staying strong in this alignment and your creative essence to fulfill your desires and the inspirations arising from the divine within you. Dreaming is your true abundance. We are creators. Now, dreaming isn't just imagining or fantasizing. It is not from a place of ego or ego attachments. It is in alignment with your divine instructions, your will and ability to manifest in the physical reality. It is so abundantly alive with divine source inspiration. You will love it. Now, here's an incentive for you to do and complete the 21 days of dreaming. After you complete the 21 days, email me and let me know how you feel about life and how it has been enhanced, and I will send you a recording, an intuitive personal inspiration message that is just for you. I hope this video has been informative and enlightening for you. Our universe is changing. You are a part of this change. Thank you for spending time with me. Many blessings and much love.